We're excited to have this conversation because you're relatively new in this role. It's been, I guess, a number of months now, but we wanted to kind of have a sit down with you and just check in on how things are going so far and kind of what's on deck for education policy here in Utah. And maybe to start things off, just because you've been in this role for a few months now, and you've also been on the Utah State Board of Education previously. So maybe first for our listeners who aren't deeply familiar with kind of the education governance structure here in Utah, what is the role like now versus being a board member? Just kind of what's your observations being a few months into this position?
Sure. And I appreciate that question because there is quite a bit of misperception about how education is governed at a state level. Different states do it differently. In the state of Utah, the state board is tasked with the general supervision and control of public education, governed by a school board. And that's constitutionally established. Other states have their education system under the governor, or, there's elected, there's appointed, there's a board, there's a commissioner. But in Utah, we're constitutionally mandated to have a public school board, Utah State Board of Education. That board is comprised of 15 members. As of 2020, that board became partisan. And that board then hires a superintendent, and the superintendent runs the agency. So it is outside of the other government agencies that fall under the governor. So it's independent, but we work lockstep, making sure that we're providing for the general control and supervision. We also, the board has the responsibility over the Utah School for the Deaf and Blind. And each local LEA, local education agency, has their own board. So we are not a super board. We are not a board over all of the boards. We at Utah State Board of Education take the laws that are set by our legislature and translate them into rules for our local education agencies to then turn into policies and how they govern theirs. So the rules set forth by the Board of Education have the rule of law, and we try to make sure that the rules that apply for all of the public schools in Utah. Now, that includes charter schools. Charters are public schools, and they're just public schools without a district. They still follow the majority of laws. I think there's two provisions that they don't follow. One has to do with evaluation, but overwhelmingly, our public schools are our traditional districts, our charters. That comprises the public school system. It has been fascinating to go from elected board member, elected in 2020 and then 2024, to the state superintendent role. I am an educator, thoroughly an educator. I am a one-trick pony. I'm all about education, been an educator all my life. Started as a social worker, actually, but then quickly switched into teaching and just multiple states and worked in public school, traditional LEA, and then switched over to the charter system prior to becoming the state superintendent. It has been fascinating to go from that governance role to boots on the ground. But I'll tell you, I'm a doer, so I'm super happy to be where I'm at right now. I could not be more excited about the opportunities in front of us.
Well, and you're coming in a unique time just because there has been so much public discussion about various education policy reforms for years now, whether it's states that are moving more and more towards embracing more robust parent choice educational programs, some of the discussion on the federal level, a lot that Christine has written about kind of this idea of pushing more of education policy and education governance away from the federal government and toward the states. So in the context of kind of you taking on this role with all of these things going on, what's your vision for education policy in Utah, knowing these different trends and, again, some of these federal discussions, even about the Federal Department of Education? What do you see as, well, this is the path forward for education here in Utah?
So education in Utah, I like to say that Utah is the biggest small town you've ever been in. So we can do amazing things that other states can't do because we really do have a community sense that is statewide. Yes, we've got different situations. We've got rural, we've got urban, sure. But by and large, we really are interested in a successful Utah. And that's not the way it is in every state. And I've been there. And so, I didn't grow up in Utah. I am a Utahn by choice. We thought we were only going to be here for 4 or 5 years, and we got here and fell in love and have chosen to stay. The opportunities we have right now are significant. One of the things that we have to do, and what I hope to do in my role, is get us rowing in the same direction. We don't all have to agree, but we have to be moving towards something together. It's the analogy of being in a kayak with somebody else and them not rowing in the same direction you are. Where does that kayak go? It either goes in a circle or it goes nowhere. We need to be rowing together. We need to get our legislature. We need to get our Utah State Board of Education, our communities. We need to really have the hard conversations and think about what we really want. Now, the details, we leave those to local communities and schools and that. But in general, we have an opportunity to seize right now, and that's really one of my major goals, is to make sure that in some ways, USBE is the link between the legislature and the field. Boots on the ground, people doing the work, the educators, the education system. And so we have an opportunity to lead in that space, and I take that responsibility very seriously. So yes, there are opportunities coming at us from the federal level. There's opportunities just abound, but we have to think about what we really want and really move together, whether it's parallel or lockstep. I don't know, but all the players coming together is very important.
Dr. Hart, it's interesting that you frame it in two ways. Number one, as sort of the opportunity for Utah to lead in the education space. And the way you phrased it was opportunities from the federal government, which strikes me as a different way of thinking about it than sometimes the consternation that's out there in the education policy space when it comes to some of the changes in the federal level. And Christine, it prompts me to bring you in and ask, because you've written so much about this and you've talked about this, but with a lot of these changes and things happening at the federal level, and Dr. Hart's kind of articulation that these are opportunities. There is an opportunity for Utah to be a leader in education policy. Christine, as you've written about sort of the need for states to prepare for this greater leadership role in specific policy areas, especially as the federal government maybe pushes some of that more towards the states, how do you make sense of that? What are some of your thoughts as far as here is what that opportunity to lead as a state looks like?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because so much of education already is at the state level, right? That's where the leadership exists. That's where the day-to-day happens anyways. But there is still this sort of idea and feeling of federal influence. And certainly they make choices that have ripple effects that kind of leave state and local leaders with a lot of questions of how to move forward. The funding freeze earlier this year, or significant staffing cuts at the federal level, kind of leave some questions about who's the right contact and things like that. Um, but it's kind of a unique place because there really is this waiting game of what do we respond to or what do we do if we don't have to, right? We're not going to just create chaos without changes happening. At the same time, there's a place for preparation, understanding that the goal of this administration is to change things significantly, right? Whether or not the department actually ever goes away almost doesn't matter in the sense that a lot of things are still changing, right? And so I think from kind of a broad look, it's really the goals are to have state consensus. I love what Dr. Hart was talking about, getting everyone rowing in the same direction. So kind of like either a statewide study task force or a study group, and then coming up with aspirational goals of how the state wants to respond, and then taking steps like audits and things like that. But even more specifically, I have written about this, but I'll be writing about this more. Some of it is even just awareness, right, of what's going on. So, for instance, the Department of Education has interagency agreements with other departments, like the Department of Labor now oversees like adult learning, right? Just knowing that, and that changes who a contact might be. Federal funding, a lot of there's been a lot of discussion about federal funding and what's going to happen there. I think Title I and IDEA, they're going to continue, but there's been discussion about an innovation of what could that look like? Could it actually be more flexible? So states might want to consider what would that look like if there was more flexibility? Could we have more student-focused reforms like micro grants where they could use qualifying students, families could use those funds in a unique way for them? And then even, civil rights. So civil rights has always kind of been, it's actually hasn't always stayed with the Department of Education, and it might actually be something that states will have to step in and do more of. So the question there, an actionable step would be, what are our state level civil rights laws? Are they in line with federal rulings, federal law? And make sure that they're kind of aligned there. So I would say a lot of it's preparation, getting on the same page, and then understanding that a lot of changes will come and kind of being open to innovation.
Thanks for watching that clip of Defending Ideas. For the full conversation, click the link in the description and make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your shows.